Hello, welcome to the next vlog. I've been thinking, I realized that in the vlogs I don't say my name. Hi, I'm Michelle. I was recently talking about my daughter, and as I have mentioned in passing here before, is my daughter is severely dyslexic. And I was mentioning how as she gets older, I was hoping that she might be able to use more technology to like accommodate her, and for example, using audiobooks when she gets older and speech to text in order to write more easily. And I had someone say something to me, and it was such a moment of, do people really think this? And I realized that people do. And so I want to share with you, first of all, what this person said. I will not reveal their identity, it's not relevant. But it is just the idea that people think this, and I want to debunk maybe a few assumptions about dyslexia in general. First of all, the statement that was made was, if you allow her to use too many helps, then she will never learn to do it herself. And so it's a bad idea to give her accommodations, then she won't learn to do it on her own. That's what someone said to me after I suggested using technology to help my severely dyslexic daughter to be able to more easily do the tasks that she needs to do for school. Before I comment on that, I think I should explain a little bit what dyslexia is and what my background is in it. I do have quite a background in dyslexia, however, I do not have it myself. Um, but I am not at all unfamiliar with it. Growing up, I saw my younger brother struggle. He had severe dyslexia. My older brother had mild to moderate dyslexia. My father has dyslexic. And I think so anyway. He was never diagnosed. But my ex-husband, is the father of my children, is dyslexic quite severely. And my oldest daughter is severely dyslexic. It runs in the family, which is why I saw it coming from far enough away to know at about age 4 that she is very probably dyslexic. I knew that it was also a high probability that my husband and I would have a child who is dyslexic. I am vastly oversimplifying, but this is how I think of it. And I think of it more as kind of like a recessive gene that is in our family. So, for example, if two people who have brown eyes can have a child potentially that has blue eyes, because if they're both carriers of a blue-eyed gene. So in this case, I think of it as, like I said, I'm vastly oversimplifying, so please don't come after me. But anyway, so for example, I am a carrier of dyslexia. I am not dyslexic myself. However, my ex-husband actually has dyslexia. So he can only pass on the dyslexic gene, and I have a 50% chance of passing on the dyslexic gene or not. As I said, vastly oversimplifying, but that is kind of, sort of, a little bit how it works. So knowing that I had a 50% chance of having a dyslexic child-ish, 50%-ish chance, I kind of was watching for the signs, the early warning signs. And let me just share a couple that we had that were vastly, like, glaringly obvious to me. For example, I taught her how to spell her name at age 4. That's pretty normal to age to learn that. So if you asked her, Sabrina, how do you spell your name? And she would say Sabrina. Yeah, Sabrina. Sabrina. Very good. Yeah, I'd be very proud of that. But then, after I had taught her that, maybe a month or so later, I asked her, and what's the first letter of your name? And she would say, A. And I said, no, 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 honey, your name starts with S. Yeah, Sabrina. Sabrina. And I would like over exaggerate it. I would like make it really big. I would say S is the first letter we say when we spell it. Yeah, Sabrina. S. Yeah. And and now making that mistake is not an indication of dyslexia. Okay. I just want to make that clear. Lots of kids make that mistake. It's really common, either choosing the last letter as the first one or the second letter, or sometimes they'll just say A because A is the first letter of the alphabet. Like there are different reasons they say A. But it's hard to say exactly which one caused my daughter to um, to say A, but whatever the reason, that is what she did. So I corrected her, as I mentioned. Then the next day, I asked her again. So, Sabrina, how do you spell your name? Sabrina. Very good. Yeah? So, what's the first letter of your name? A. No, honey, no. It's S, yeah? Sabrina. Sabrina, yeah? And we'd go over it again. And the next day, I'd ask again and get the exact same answer again. I'd ask the next day and I'd get the exact same answer again. In the end, it took her 4 months before she was able to correctly say that her name begins with S. 4 months. Which, in the end, is me telling her probably about 100 times before she really got it. Because although we didn't quite do it every day, I asked her almost every single day, what's the first letter of your name? And she didn't get it. That's very concerning. That's concerning. That is a big red flag that something's wrong. Another red flag that came up was when we were practicing sounds of letters. So we came to the letter T. Here's a good example. So I said, okay, what words start with T? Let's think about it. And I give her a few examples. I'd say table, teacup, yeah? And then have her come up with one. And she would say, tower. And I said, yes, that's right. And then she'll say, parrot. And I'll say, no, honey. Parrot doesn't start with the T. And in the end, I understood that it was because of the T at the end, although I'm not 100% sure. She may have been confusing the sounds of P and T. Either way, it was very strange. Once again, by itself is not necessarily a red flag. It's just with all of the other red flags together, then you're like, something's off. Something's off, yeah? Just one last example is, so a child's name tends to be very sacred to them. It's very important to them. They're like, this is important, this is me, this is my name. If a child consistently misspells their own name without noticing, then that can definitely be a big, big red flag of dyslexia. So another one that happened was when she was about 5 or maybe even already 6. She wrote her name on something and then taped it to her door. And I went over and it said Asrbina. Asrbina. Child. However, it was very frustrating around the same time. Whenever I mentioned these stories to people I knew, I got told over and over and over and over again to stop comparing your child to other children. Everyone's on their own timeline. She's probably just a late bloomer. I was not comparing my child to a specific other child. I was comparing my child to the average child of that age and just what kind of things they should be able to do by now. That's what I was doing. I don't think that it's a bad thing to do. where you can see like where they might have deficits, what you need to work on. And that's what I was trying to do when I realized that she's having a lot of trouble in like the whole letters concept. And knowing that dyslexia runs in my family quite strongly, I decided that it would be, really, really wanted to get her tested. Now, in Germany, they don't test children for dyslexia until they have completed the first grade. So we went through a battery of tests at the beginning of the second grade. She took an IQ test. She took I don't even remember all the tests she took, but it was definitely attention as well, and general development, and then reading and writing, of course. Those were definitely part of that general tests. They discovered that in every point she was average, so, or two slightly above average. So average intelligence, average development, average attention, and then we got to reading and writing. And although she was around the 50th percentile, 48th, 52nd, 55th, and everything except for reading and writing were both in the first percentile, 1%. I believe the diagnosis for dyslexia means that the difference between the intelligence and development and the reading and writing has to be a difference of at least 15%, which I believe is one standard deviation. But with my daughter, it was more like 50, which puts her at an extreme end. With dyslexia is like that means that she is severely dyslexic. This is a huge difference. So moving on to what is dyslexia exactly? Like what, so now you've seen the signs, the early warning signs, and you know what it is like to get like diagnosed with it. So let me look around to get something that's asymmetrical. Here we go. So here's one example. Dyslexics in general tend to think in 3 dimensions. Most people don't. Most people are either very visual or they're audio. So they either receive audio commands very well and descriptions, or they need to see it, like a picture of it. But dyslexics are more 3-dimensional. So here's an example. This is a hammer, yeah? If I hold the hammer like this, it's a hammer. If I hold it like that, it's a hammer. If I hold it like this, it's a hammer. Yes? It's still a hammer. Dyslexics, people think like this. When they see something, anything, even a drawing on a page, it doesn't matter how you turn it, it's still the same thing. Yes? But that's not true of letters. So as soon as you write down the letter B, lowercase b, write down, yeah, that's right? Write down a B as the same as a D. To them, it's the same. It's exactly the same. It's just flip-flopped over. And they don't understand why people think that they're different. They'll look at that and be like, I don't understand. What are you talking about? That's the same letter. Because in their minds have just rotated it. The same thing happens with P and Q. The same thing happens with N and U. It can flip upside down. M and W. Like there are lots of things that happens with. If they look too similar, a dyslexic brain cannot tell them apart. That's the same thing. It's the same thing. And they don't understand why people don't get that. Another thing that they'll do is in 3 dimensions, I have all this random stuff over here. So if you have like these 3 things, yeah? You have a hammer, a thermometer, and some clippers. And you're like, oh, you have those 3 things? Well, if you put them in this order, you still have those 3 things, yes? You put them in this order, it's still the same 3 things. So in their brain, the order of things doesn't matter, which means that if, as long as they have all of the right letters, they put them in any order they want, that should be this have the same meaning. And it's a very difficult concept for them to grasp, that it's not the same thing, that there's a difference. On the other hand, these people tend to have a very, very good spatial awareness. They tend to be people who are very unlikely to get lost, people who are able to follow maps without a second thought, people who can take apart an engine, put it back together. Like, three-dimensional things make perfect sense to them. They're like, I got this. But as soon as you try to put it in 2 dimensions, like in writing, then they get very confused, because those things only make sense in their brain in 3. You understand the difference? Like, this is why they're having trouble. This is why they struggle. So when it comes to reading and writing, dyslexia is considered a learning disability. This is something someone is born with, and a disability is a difficulty of something someone is born with, they have no control over, not always necessarily born with, but very often born with. And I compare it to other disabilities, like a physical disability. For example, if someone has cerebral palsy, very often born with, and end up needing a wheelchair to assist them in their walking because their legs are very weak. Yes, that is quite a common occurrence with people with cerebral palsy. If that is the case, would you tell someone with cerebral palsy that if they just worked hard enough and exercised their legs, then they shouldn't need a wheelchair, and that they will never get strong enough unless they stop using their wheelchair? Does that make sense to anybody else? And yet, this statement of dyslexic people should just work harder to get better at it and become better writers, like, that's the same thing to me. You want to take away the technology I suggested using for my severely dyslexic daughter in order to help her get stronger? That is not how this works. That is not how this works. For a severely dyslexic child, my daughter is doing fantastic. She is in therapy twice a week for it, where she practices reading, she practices writing, she practices spelling a lot. She practices like nobody's business, and actually her grades are pretty decent. Her teacher said that her improvement is one of the best of all the dyslexic kids that she's had. And like, the difference in the last 2 years is huge. She's suddenly able to read independently, and she's able to write independently. It's just with many spelling errors. This is something she really struggles with. Don't you think that it's a normal thing in order to allow a child who has this disability to get the help that they need? Don't you think that's normal? Because I think that's normal. It's like telling a child who needs glasses, which, by the way, my daughter also needs, that they should take them off in order to strengthen their eyes. Really? I know there are people who really think this. Just like the people who think that dyslexics just need to work harder. Dude, you don't know how hard she works. Like, that child is working harder than any other 3rd grader I know, and she's killing it. However, she's never going to be an A student, not in writing, because she has a disability. And I would never expect her to go through school without extra help, any more than I would expect her to go through life without glasses. I am not going to insist that she practice more, that she work harder. Anyway, that is my end of my rant. One last thing I do want to mention is I have heard lots of times from people who either refuse to tell their children that they have a diagnosis of dyslexia or who are just afraid to tell them. So let me reassure you, when we finally got the diagnosis, the official diagnosis that Sabrina had dyslexia, she was so relieved. Do you know why? Because that means that it's not her fault. It's not something that she's just hasn't been working hard enough at. That she was very much afraid that the tests would come back that everything is fine and she just needs to work harder. But that's not the case. She listened to the diagnosis of you are definitely dyslexic and she's like, oh my gosh, that explains everything. And she was so happy. Okay? Don't be afraid to tell your kids they're dyslexic. They will finally be relieved to know this and just happy that somebody was paying attention enough to notice that they needed some extra help. They will love you for it. They're not going to be angry at you. They're not going to be disappointed in themselves. They're going to be relieved because they now know what's the matter is, and now they can address it directly. So that has been my experience. I don't think that anyone should be afraid to talk to a child about dyslexia if you think that they might have it. And I think that there should be more understanding in the general community about what dyslexia is and what it isn't. And it is a learning disability. It is not a weakness that you can work out and get rid of. So, end of my rant for the day. Thank you for coming to my vlog and listening to me rant about dyslexia. Comment down below if you have any experience with dyslexia, and I would love to hear about it. And please join me for the next vlog.